Welcome back to the Reier on YouTube channel, where it is time once again for No Sleep Teal. It's a show dedicated to discussion involving the AFC South, the NFL's Jacksonville Jaguars. Travis Reier back with you here on the channel, joined by my co-host, Evan Reier. Evan, a little bit of a respite here on the program. We were able to get together a couple weekends ago with you and the Ham. That was a blast. And then we had the annual sort of get-together, weekly get-together, I refer to as like Reier-O-Rama, Reier Palooza with Pops and the rest of the family down at Crescent Beach. So we're back tan, well, maybe a little tan, rested. We are ready, right? Here on No Sleep Teal.
No, for sure. It's kind of been a tale of two summers, with what y'all have had going on and then what I've got going on. But, at the same time, it's been quiet for the Jaguars, which we were just talking about before the show. And that's a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing that we don't feel like having to do emergency podcasts because of injuries or some crazy development or scandal. We've experienced that in years past with the Jaguars. So the fact that everything's just kind of, ticking along, practice is happening. No one's getting hurt, just moving. That's definitely a positive.
It's the summer of Travis Hunter. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Travis, for good reasons, though, like you said, it's been positive. Surrounding his acquisition by the Jaguars in the 2025 NFL draft, and then the intrigue, the interest in really the rarest of rarities when you think about the potential for a two-way player. And I know that's been discussed in sort of national platforms here in the last couple of weeks with Liam Cohen and other members of the Jaguars organization. And that's just going to be a fascinating storyline to continue to follow through training camp, through the preseason, and into the season, because first and foremost, the question is going to be asked, how much is enough and or how much is too much if you try to take that approach?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's I don't see a world, and I think, pretty much everyone's in this boat. I don't see a world in which he's playing, every snap, or, they're even pushing that. I think especially out the gate, those first few weeks, if they're thinking, okay, well, he's a corner first or he's a receiver first, they're going to let him play as much as he can on that side of the ball, but probably 10 to 15, maybe 20 snaps on a good day on the other side. Tony Khan was speaking on this recently, just basically saying that, he's impressive on both sides and that Liam Cohen really wants to involve Travis on both sides. But, at the same time, he also, basically has a little bit of a cop out, just saying like game flow, it depends on how the game is going.
Right.
Essentially what that means to me is that if there's a 20-point difference between the Jags, whether they're losing or winning, you can bet that Travis Hunter's going to be getting some serious breaks.
Well, here's what I like that I don't know if it's been talked about a lot or not, to be honest with you, is that I like him first and foremost, it seems, as a wide receiver in those three wide receiver sets, De'Ami Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., and then also with Travis in those looks. But defensively, where I think he could have a lot of value is if you lose one of your starting corners. Let's say you're in a game and Tyson Campbell, guy who struggled to stay on the field, right? Let's say you lose Tyson Campbell in the second quarter of the game at Cincinnati in week 2. Well, you probably can feel like, well, we'd prefer not to have Travis Hunter in there for every snap for 2.5 quarters. But if it comes down to it, he can get you through a game as kind of an every down corner to go along with his offensive duties until you can kind of answer that question or those concerns going into the next week. He can bridge it with an injury there for you from a depth perspective.
Oh yeah, no, that's like, especially where it seems like that could be, a godsend, and where he's worth every penny is, if it becomes a need rather
emergency corner.
Right. Yeah. And also just
And a
matchup.
high level emergency corner.
Yeah, very high level emergency corner, probably the fastest DB on the team as well. So if
Yeah,
you are in a situation like the possibilities are kind of endless. If you're in a situation where you're facing an opponent that has a really quick receiver that Jarian Jones can't seem to get a hand on him, Tyson Campbell can't seem to keep up. Okay, well isolate him, get Travis Hunter out there, and at least see if he can. You get to experiment, you get to do a lot of stuff, and it's beyond just the commercial value of Travis Hunter. I
sure.
mean that's definitely a clear reason why he was so appealing to the team as well. The Jags have always been in sore need of people that get national attention, and Travis Hunter can do that. But also, just as a kind of Swiss Army knife, what
Sure.
he can provide is potentially endless. It's
Absolutely.
it's exciting. I mean, really, I cannot wait for preseason. I haven't been this excited for preseason in a long time just because he's going to get snaps. He's a rookie. He's got to get out there. And I just want to see him do it on both sides. I want to see what that looks like.
We asked this question a couple of shows ago about the face of the franchise after the draft with Travis Hunter. And I think in this last month or so plus, it has been Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
And we talked about it at the time, not just because he's the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, was such a prolific player, highly publicized player at Colorado. I think he embraces it. That's a big part of it too. To be the face of a franchise, it's something you have to sort of be totally comfortable with. And as we said a couple of shows ago here on the podcast, not entirely sure that's something that Trevor Lawrence covets, right? And that's okay. That's fine. But boy, Travis Hunter with meet and greets and things like that, and he's doing it primarily in the area. He's doing all this stuff in Duval, which further cements him and endears him to this fan base.
Yeah, I mean, Ron Miles, said the other day that like this guy has no ego. This guy is all about, just having fun and performing well. And you see it, in those clips where he's dancing and his teammates are kind of like knock it off. It's like,
and he's always jazzed up.
Yeah.
I mean, his gear. A lot of guys don't wear the gear when they're outside the building.
Well, I think it's a testament. I mean, when you think about someone like Deion Sanders, who, as your coach is that ego and his family and all that different stuff, you can't be. It's insane that Travis Hunter still became, the biggest star of that squad, and it's all talent. It's all his ability. It has nothing to do with, trying to be the ego, because he wasn't going to outshine any of them in that sense. So, if you are able to exist and not only exist, but excel, dominate in a kind of environment like that, I mean, I feel like walking into an NFL locker room is just probably a dream come true, because for the most part, there are egos, but it's definitely a far cry from what's going on in Boulder.
Yeah. In most instances with a star from the outset, like we're seeing with Travis Hunter, that can be a polarizing situation within the building, within a franchise, within a locker room. I think we're seeing it even in the WNBA with Caitlin Clark in a lot of ways. I don't have any knowledge of that being an issue within her team, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, she burns that bright right now that it could certainly be the case. But Travis Hunter, the dividends so far without playing a snap for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'd say have been about what you could have hoped for. Let's talk about the Jags today, Evan, as a plus 300 bet in the AFC South. That would slot them second in the division. The Houston Texans are I would say, pretty wide favorite at this point, as they should be, where we're talking about Vegas. But the gap between the Jags and the Colts is actually closer than the one between the Texans and the Jags. And I want to sort of go through the schedule for these teams a little bit, but focus primarily, obviously, on the Jaguars. And we'll offer up, do we think the Jags at plus 300 are a real value in the AFC South? Or is it maybe a stay away situation with this team right now?
I think the odds, line up. I think they make sense based on what we know, what has been proven on the field, and even with guys like Travis Hunter coming in, exciting, new additions. You Vegas especially is never going to really sway the odds that much for even a extremely talented rookie. So the Texans at +110, I think makes sense. I think they almost could be a little like even bigger favorites than what they are. They're
Yeah.
at +110, Jags at +300. I could see a world in which the Texans maybe opened at like -120 or something like that. Um, and then yeah, like you said, the Jags and the Colts are +10 apart. Like they're a cent apart, or 10 cents apart, essentially. So I think at +300, I would say it's good value. Obviously, I'm biased, but that's just because as while I understand the Texans being the favorite, and I said that of course that Vegas I think kind of nailed the odds there. I would also say that there was plenty of reason that we saw last year to think, yeah, they might not be, they're definitely not invulnerable. They can
Right.
definitely be hurt. They can definitely be beat. Um,
I
you
think
know,
I think if this was the Texans coming off CJ Stroud's rookie season,
it would be a lot wider.
and it's not just the performance from year two, I think, for CJ Stroud. There's some unknowns about his health,
Yeah.
even at this point, as we prepare for training camp here in just a few weeks. So there are questions, no doubt, with the Houston Texans. I think most of those have to do with the quarterback situation, offensive line, certainly in transition, Cam Robinson coming in. Not sure how much you fortify
Yeah.
things in that particular situation, but I agree. I don't think the Texans come off as sort of Kevlared up where the
No.
rest of the division is concerned. Let me ask you this about the Jags. And sure, I think at +300, yeah, Jags have value, but as we know, there's a difference in saying I'll throw 10 on the Jags at
Right.
+300 and saying, oh man, let me get a stack on the
Yeah.
Jags. That's free money.
Free.
Free money. I mean, this is free. They must be asleep at the wheel in Vegas, because they
What are they
always
doing?
are, right? Yeah, they're always
Yeah.
asleep. But what would be kind of your biggest reason for hesitancy to not really put a significant number down on that +300 right now when you look at this Jags team, whether it's schedule, whether it's coaching staff, whether it's personnel, maybe a combination of things? What would you point to as, yeah, there's value for $10 or $100 even, but anything more than that, I'm not so sure.
I think variables kind of from a like you said a variety of different places is the main thing. Liam Cohen, first time head coach. That's a major not going to say a red flag, but a yellow flag on making a bet like that. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, until he puts it together for over half a season, then it's hard to back a team, even if they're doing a different offensive identity, even if they're planning on running the ball a lot more, even if they've got defensive improvements. They don't have a quarterback that's probably the best in the division. Then
Yeah.
it's tough to back that horse. What's not part of that though is the schedule. The schedule is not. If I was just looking at schedules, then I would feel very comfortable betting on the Jags because they did get very favorable schedule, finishing third in the AFC South, and at the end of the day, they don't really get an excuse in that department. The Texans and Colts definitely have a tougher schedule, but yeah, I think it's got to be just new head coach and a quarterback that, unfortunately, as things stand, you can't really trust to take over, over the course of the season.
Yeah, my concern would start with the coaching change. Not
Yeah,
that I don't think there needed to be a coaching change,
yeah,
that obviously there needed to be, but you said it. We haven't seen Liam Cohen as a head coach anywhere. Anywhere.
yeah,
Okay? And yeah, he's done a nice job as an offensive coordinator at some previous stops like Kentucky and most recently with the Tampa Bay Bucks. But this is an entirely different fire when you're dealing with the entirety of a football team, not just a position room and or a side of the football. when it starts to hit the fan, and invariably in this league, I don't care who you are, because of the competitive nature, because of the balance of the teams in this league, you're going to have that 2 or 3 game losing streak.
Yeah.
And with the exception of maybe a couple of 3 teams in this entire league, you're going to go through it. And how is that individual going to handle that in terms of sort of commandeering that team and directing that team through that turmoil? Yeah, some of it goes back on people like Trevor Lawrence and Josh Hines Allen on the defensive side. And, there's ownership that has to be taken by the rest of that coaching staff. But I don't have as much of a concern with Liam Cohen coming up with offensive game plans and sort of nurturing Trevor Lawrence to a level of respectability as I do when adversity strikes.
Yeah.
How does he come off to his football team? That's what I don't know about Liam Cohen. I've heard some things from people involved with him at previous stops. Some of it was positive, just as much was a little bit concerning in terms of how he's handled that as a coordinator when things haven't gone well. So that's the great unknown for me.
Yeah.
Liam Cohen, if this team starts out 0-2, and we talked about back-to-backs and the important nature of Carolina to open the season in week 1, and then you go to Cincinnati, that's what I don't know about Liam Cohen. If they come out of the gates 0-2 and are looking maybe 1-5 or something like that squarely in the face, how is Liam Cohen going to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to tell until it happens. And it's I don't know. I like the positive energy, yelling Duval, doing the whole thing, whatever. That's great. But we kind of talked about the same problem with Doug Peterson, and we knew that Doug, knew how to like handle adversity and different stuff. But it's kind of rah rah to rah rah in terms of personalities,
Right.
and
These are kind of 180s, right? I mean,
yeah.
it feels like Doug Peterson to me was almost too flatline. And
Yeah, but the ice cream stuff, the hey, we
yeah,
got you a treat and all this little stuff. Like,
right.
I just it's two different personalities, but it's also very like player focused. I guess
Yeah.
that's more what I'm trying to connect on is that they're
Yeah.
like they're player guys. That's great, but you better be able to also like kick the butt and like, just get them moving along when things aren't really because
Yeah.
Doug lost that locker room fast. Like
Yeah.
once things went south, it went south real quick.
Yeah.
Can Liam, keep together a locker room, when things aren't super positive? Now, when you have, new additions like, Travis Hunter, who's famously good at, bringing the locker room up, maybe it's not completely on him,
Right.
but he is where it starts and ends. So,
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, Liam Cohen is the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars really for one reason. And I know you think I'm going to say Trevor Lawrence, but I'm not. It connects to Trevor Lawrence, but he was hired essentially because of the belief that he can implement a run game
yeah.
that will cure a lot of what has ailed this football team in recent years. So if you can run the football like the Bucs ran it last year, then certainly that's beneficial to Trevor Lawrence. Not that Liam isn't entirely invested in Trevor Lawrence, almost first and foremost, because my understanding is that between Liam and assistants, there's no fewer than 5 members of this coaching staff that are in some way tied into pouring into Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
So that kind of tells you the nature of that situation. But basically, if you told me the Jags were gonna move into top 10, top 15 in the league in rush offense, then I would say, boy, that value of plus 300 goes up immensely, because I think that not only helps Trevor Lawrence, I think it probably helps Liam Cohen, because then the adversity question doesn't come up, I wouldn't think, as much.
No, for sure. It definitely, if they can do what Tampa did last year,
Yeah.
then they will win probably at least 8 or 9 games, even with any other type of issue that might pop up. It's hilarious that over, the course of especially like my young life, how pass heavy the NFL got, for
Right.
years and years and years. And then now we're reverting back to you're seeing, teams like the Ravens and all, pretty much everyone across the NFL is like, you got to have two running backs and you got to run the ball a lot. Like, and if you don't, the Chiefs run the ball an insane amount for
Right.
having, the best quarterback in the league. But yeah, I mean, it definitely run game is so critical, and it's also part of the reason why every single episode I'm seemingly talking about the offensive line of did they get better enough, or are they good enough? If you want to talk about another reason, if you're doing the nitty gritty, if you're doing all the research that should be done, if you're going to place a futures bet like this, then maybe one of your biggest red flags is this offensive line going to actually be able to do it?
And the
So,
backs. If you're going
and
to
the
run the
backs, yeah.
football as it sits right now, are you in a great spot to be able to do that? Understanding that you feel like you upgraded at guard and center through free agency, but even some of that is up in the air because at center, we're talking about a guy who made one start, I guess, last year. Now at guard, I feel much stronger about the stance that they did upgrade. But center, and then the tackle spots, what are you going to get from Walker Little and Anton Harrison? It's almost like a golfer who made double on their last hole. Did they bounce back with bogey, or is kind of what we saw in the last hole carry over now?
Yes,
With the third-year player from Oklahoma.
yeah. And it's also offensive line, I would say, is one of those positional groups in the NFL that a lot of those guys are around a similar level of talent. Staff, I think, at offensive line matters maybe more than any other positional group. You think about like the Doug Marrone era in Jacksonville, that offense, like him, plus if his offensive staff had guys on that offensive line that weren't, they weren't stars. They weren't like huge names. Cam Robinson, of course, was good, but like they just got the most out of those guys. Can, Cohen's group do the same? That's something we won't know until really week 2, week 3, week 4. So there's just a lot of question marks, and that is where, this bet is probably the most difficult to make. That's kind of the thing though, is that comparing it to the Colts odds, which is
Right.
essentially the same bet. The Colts definitely, they made a couple additions. Travarius Ward is definitely a big one. I'm a big Travarius Ward guy. I think that was really shrewd on them. But I don't feel like they're that much better of a team than they were last year, kind of in a
Right.
similar boat with the quarterback situation. I feel like their ceiling is way lower than the Jags.
Feels
I
more and
think,
more like the Jags are gonna, if people stay healthy, feels like the Jags very well may see Daniel Jones twice
yeah,
with the
yeah,
Colts. I
yeah.
don't know.
No, I
Maybe
think that's
they
a very
get
real
some Anthony
possibility.
Richardson, but
But whether
that's the
it's
way it sort of feels right now.
unless Anthony Richardson like actualizes, like becomes like
And even
everything that
beyond
they thought.
performance, health is something
Yeah,
you wonder about with him,
yeah.
you know?
No, for sure. If he stays healthy and he becomes the guy that they wanted him to be when they drafted him, then yeah, for sure the Colts are the smarter bet here. But really overall, I would say
Yeah.
that their ceiling, even if the Colts have a really good year, I think the Texans are probably still a better team.
Are the
Like
Colts, though, better built right now to run the football better than the Jags are? Because
yeah, I would say
that's
so.
what I think. I think the Colts right now are still built better for that. I mean, we'll
Yeah.
see.
I mean, Jonathan Taylor's
Something
top
else I
five
don't
running
like.
back.
Yeah. Something else I don't like for the Jags in that sort of matchup more with the Colts than the Texans. I would like the Jags to see the Colts the first time about the time the Jags are going to see the Texans.
Yeah.
Like, I'd like to see the Colts in that week
Week 3
3
spot.
in Jacksonville and get that W.
Yeah, and just go ahead and
And
get a
maybe
division
not
win
give the
and just do
Colts
it.
a chance to sort of get it together like they're going to have. The Colts and the Jags see each other twice in December. They don't, it's late
Yeah.
before you get those two teams together. So in relation to the Colts, there's a couple things I like for the Jags, and a couple things I'm maybe not as crazy about. But when you think about the Texans, and we talk so much about the Jags schedule there to open the season, but man, you really get into the Texans schedule at the LA Rams to open the season in
Yeah.
week 1, and then they get the Bucks. It's in Houston in week 2, but that's a Monday night game in Houston. Before the Texans head to Jacksonville in week 3. That week 3 game in Jacksonville, I think if you bet the plus 300, you can probably either feel like you're going to cash that ticket, maybe, or if the Jags don't beat the Texans at home in week 3, you probably can go ahead and rip it up, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. It's also just because even if the Texans have a slow start and then they beat the Jags, like let's say they're 0-2, they beat the Jags, go 1-2, they get the Titans right after at home, they're going to be back to 500 right away. And yeah, that's all they really need, even if they have a slow start. But I mean, their first 7 games, just like we talked about with the Jags first 7 games being really important and difficult in some spots. I mean, it's not just the Rams and Bucks. After the Titans, you go Ravens on the road, Seahawks on the road, 49ers at home, Broncos at home. I mean, that is a slog. And then they still have the Bills and the Chiefs. I mean, that's the thing is if I kind of said this before we recorded, but the Jags are bad this year. They're bad. It's not due to like, oh, well, schedule kind of screwed us over. It's like, nah, like if you don't win the division this year, or it's because you're just not very good, and because the Texans have a slog. The Colts also somewhat easier, kind of like the Jags, but even then, plenty of difficult games on that schedule.
So let me ask you this: which would you feel most comfortable putting a fairly sizable amount down on?
$50.
The Jags over the win total projection, which I think is what, 7.5? Is that the Jags right now? Is it 7.5?
Real quick.
Or would you feel more comfortable putting that same money down on this plus 300?
Oh God,
because I mean, when you think about a division winner in the AFC South this year, it could be 9-8, 10-7, and that's kind of where
Jags are at 7.5.
Yeah,
is the line.
They could go over the win total by a win, maybe 2,
and still not win the division,
and or win the division.
Yeah, I think I'd probably take the win total. I just think that's a safer bet. If I'm thinking about just actual betting logic, I think it's a safer bet to go for a situation in which the Jags win 8 or 9 games, because I mean, even if they have a solid season, they go 9-8. Texans or Colts could still very much just win 10 or 11 games. It could just happen. So, I would go with the win total. It's also I will say this
you
too,
go
though.
over. You feel more.
Some books have Jags at
8.5. Yeah, don't mess with that.
No,
I would
7.5. I'll take the over. 8.5. No way.
No,
can't do it.
No, can't do it.
If you offer me 8.5, I'm going under, and I know that
I'm going under 8.5.
I should be a better fan, but if we're just talking about my money, then don't bet with your emotions.
Right. Right.
But yeah.
But what's the reason why you would feel good about the plus 300 if you bet it? I mean, what would be something you feel like you could bank on with this football team is giving you that reason to say, you know what, I'll go $100 on the plus 300, maybe double up on the win total too.
Yeah, I think it's schedule plus like new offensive additions specifically.
Yeah,
the defense ought to be about the same. I mean, really, it is the same in most spots.
Gotta be better though. I mean,
they gotta be better.
They got to be better coordinated, if nothing else. Yeah. That was a disaster last year.
The thing is, too, is
that defense never had a chance.
Yeah, and they ought to have a little bit more juice in terms of, just excitement to play.
If nothing else, people will be properly positioned.
Yeah.
And they will be on the field at times when they should be on the field.
Yeah.
And not just sort of this random approach to all of that we saw last season.
But the reason why I say the offensive additions those are the new things that really feel like could amplify this team between Travis
McCurry.
Hunter, Dwami Brown, McCarry. I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully is a steady rock, and Hainsey as well on that offensive line. If those are all end up being upgrades, then that offense ought to score a pretty good amount every game. Like, it shouldn't be too difficult, even against a good defense.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's just that I think the Jags upside, what the Jags can be, is higher than what the Colts can be.
Yeah, I do too.
But I think that the Colts floor is higher than the Jags. The Jags could be a 2 or 3 win team, God forbid. But
I think the Colts, for better or worse, are going to go into week 1 knowing exactly who the hell they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Jags, it could be
a
little more open-ended.
Putting the railroad tracks down in front of you as you go down the.
But I guess, I talked earlier about I'd rather the Jags see the Colts early. Maybe you'd rather see them late, because then you got your shit figured out.
Yeah, that's the thing is
you see a lot of the light at the end of the tunnel. You're talking about the schedule being favorable. You're obviously talking about the second half of the schedule, and especially
absolutely.
as you get into December.
You got to survive that first half, like we've said all summer. I mean,
it's
if you can just survive that first half, then I think you do want to see the Colts late. I think you want to see everybody late. If you can just get through at 3 and 4 or something like that, then you would definitely want him. You would definitely want them late. But
and with Trevor, it's almost like Anthony Richardson a little bit, because it's not just the performance question anymore.
Now injury issues.
It's health. So when you think about pros and cons on the offensive side of the ball, it's encouraging to envision that sort of last 6 or 7 game run with a healthy and confident and performing Trevor Lawrence. But after the last couple of seasons, that's something that maybe Jaguar fans are struggling with. Keeter tuned in here live with us, Evan. He says, because of Travis Hunter's size, I would play him on defensive passing downs. Well, yeah, I think would be the plan, mostly because those are the money downs. Passing downs are typically third down, and you're trying to get off the field situationally. So that would make sense. But I think it's a fascinating thing to consider. I
am curious though. Keeter's comment, I think, is it's one of those where it's like, yeah, of course, like that's the plan. But at the same time, it did make me think, like, I am curious to see Travis Hunter, what happens when there's a toss or a stretch,
game.
It's his
quick
it's
screens
his
out
turn
there
to make the tackle.
Yeah.
I am curious to see what that looks like.
Yeah.
And
that's part of the concern, because opponents are going to be thinking that.
Yeah.
Let's see if this guy can set an edge. Let's try to put him in some physical situations.
Bubble screens, all that different kind of stuff.
And what I've seen of Travis Hunter doesn't speak to a guy that turns down or makes business decisions, or he hadn't prior to this. But the reality is it is a different beast in the National Football League than it is, playing in the Pac-12 or the Big 12 now, like we see with Colorado. So I think, as we talked about earlier, we're just all really interested to see how that's going to play out. I'll tell you something else, man. Plus 300 with the Jags. I know I'm going to kick it and punt it. Special teams. I should feel pretty good about that. With our all pros coming back. Our pro bowlers. I don't know about all pro, but
they should have been. They got screwed.
They got jagged. They got jagged.
But no, I mean, there are plenty of stable things on this team that feel like they weren't stable last year. Like Josh Hines-Allen's season last year was so surprising to me. There are lots of reasons for upside. So if you were going to make this kind of range, this kind of plus 300 or what have you, I would say, it's about as good as value as you're going to find. Because, for example, the Los Angeles Chargers are plus 320 in the AFC West. Are you joking?
Yeah, some of these divisional odds are wild.
Well, the thing is I would never make that bet just because the Kansas City Chiefs own that division. And I would even say the Broncos have just as good of a chance as the Chargers.
It's not like the AFC East where The
Yeah.
Bills are minus 275.
Yeah,
And
like,
the
no chance.
Patriots are actually the next team at plus 500.
Hey, put it on them.
Drake May. Make it happen.
But yeah, I mean, if you think about value and you compare to the other divisions available, such as, like it is nuts to me that the Detroit Lions are plus 155 to win the division. I mean, like, I know the Packers are good. I know the Vikings are good, or the Vikings were good last year with a quarterback that they don't have anymore. But like, there are some spots where they just feel like no brainers, but that's where Vegas gets you. That's of course it's easy.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, load up.
You've never been wrong in your life.
Yeah, I mean, with this plus 300, I would advise still caution. I mean, sure, if you want to put
if you're going to put a flyer on anything, this makes sense to me.
Yeah, I still wouldn't go heavy, but the payoff is worth it. There's value in that number just on that alone, and this is still a roster and a team that considers itself to be in its window, obviously, with what it has invested at the quarterback position. Now, again, performance along with health with Trevor Lawrence, that's to be determined still after the last couple of seasons. And I go back to the biggest reason why I wouldn't load up is I don't know enough about Liam Cohen and managing the entirety of a team dynamic, essentially, mostly when things aren't great. I mean, everybody can coach the hell out of a team when you're winning 7 straight. But perhaps he's going to prove capable of that, because I think this team's going to find out perhaps early in the season how it sort of handles adversity, because it's coming.
No, it's coming. Sure. 100%.
All right, Ev, it was a lot of fun. Anything else you want to throw at us before we get out of here? From Party Girl, by the way, we're at Party Girl, as we typically are here on No Sleep Till, 4205 St. John's Avenue in the Avondale district of Duval. Yeah.
Detroit Lions plus 155 sounds pretty good. Also, San Francisco 49ers plus 165. I'm slamming that. Slamming that. Oh my God. Are you kidding? Like, the Rams.
You're not worried about Sam Darnold in Seattle?
No.
Okay. No. I didn't think so.
If there's a team with a chip on its shoulder in the NFL this year, it's got to be the 49ers.
What about Kyler Murray?
I mean, he's good. Gonna get that bag. Good. The NFC West is tough. I personally just think that 49ers, between Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan, that whole crew, they're upset. I know that they're going to come out with heat. And if they don't, then it's the end of Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. Yeah. It's either the end of that era and they rebuild, or they win the division. If it's one of those two, in my eyes, I'm going with the division. But yeah, just throwing that out there, but nothing else.
Have fun as always, my man. Look forward to doing it again very soon right here on No Sleep Till on the Reier on YouTube channel.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right. Wait. For Evan, I'm Travis. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Peace.